We're getting word this morning, of course, fleshing out the details this week about what happened with the economy in the month of June, and it looks as if our national official, we stress that, unemployment rate dropped to 5.3%, 200 some odd thousand jobs created for the month. So you'll be hearing people in media, all of the Obama sycophants, campaign appendages that they were over two elections. They'll be telling us that this is the result of his brilliant economic policies and that the stimulus package from 5, 6 years ago, that it actually worked. It's finally bearing fruit after all of these years. But they won't be telling you about this. 93.6 million adult Americans are out of work. That's an all-time record. And when you understand how this is actually working and being put together, I think you have to go back and you have to say, okay, how do we classify full-time workers? Well, now with the passage of Obamacare, a full-time job is considered 30 hours a week. So that changes that somewhat too. But I was reading the other day after Rush Limbaugh mentioned it on his program, and I went to the blog that he was referencing, written by former Reagan budget director David Stockman. And I was going through this, and he was breaking down what all of these different statistics mean. How many people are out of work if you stop looking for work, everything that's actually judged with it. Now, I've had a friend telling me for years that the unemployment rate is somewhere around 23%, but Stockman says the real unemployment rate from his figures, if you've got 93, almost 94 million people out of work, that's about half the labor force. It's 42.9%, according to David Stockman. How does a country continue to survive with a number that high, and for how long can we continue? 76, 8 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and you're on the air.
Bill, here's the problem. They're afraid of the truth. Nobody wants to say the truth. They want to sugarcoat everything and make everybody feel warm and fuzzy. We need to put our big boy pants on and just get to reality. Just like your intro, where Obama says, today our immigration system is broken. No, it's not broken. It's not enforced. You got a presidential candidate that says that he said what's reality, and now he's being persecuted. An illegal alien is just that. He's here illegally. So if you want to say anything, don't call them rapists, don't call them anything. They are breaking the law. Period.
Yeah.
They're breaking the law. But they don't want to hear the truth.
Criminals is what criminals break the law. We could just simply call them, criminals.
Right, because they're breaking the law. The fact that they're here when they're not supposed to be here and not doing it the right way, they're breaking the law. If I break into somebody's house, I'm going to be arrested. I broke the law. But they broke the law, and they want to put their arms around them and say, poor, poor, poor baby.
Well, thank you for the call. They want to say that because they know who they're going to vote for. You give them driver's licenses, and you give them the right to vote. The Supreme Court the other day, by the way, took another hammer blow to voter identification laws. So we're going to have people just showing up. And by the time fraud is discovered, the election will be over and it will be certified. And once that election is certified, then it stays, right? We can't go back and turn it around. I think that Donald Trump, and I listened to his speech that morning. Well, he was giving the speech while I was on air, but I was watching the closed captioning, and then I managed to hear it afterward. Real Clear Politics carried it, had a tape of it in its entirety within a short while. What Trump was trying to say is some of the people who are coming here illegally, and yes, by breaking the law and coming here illegally, they're all criminals right off the top. But he was outlining what's some of the problems that have been caused by some. He didn't say all. In fact, when he mentioned some of them are rapists, then he stopped and he paused and he said, but not all. And he mentioned in his very remarks, he qualified his remarks by saying, yes, but there are some very good people. So why is it that he is being attacked and pummeled? Because he didn't say it the way they wanted him to say it. They don't want you saying anything at all, because if you bring attention to it, then they may not be able to pull it off. And pulling off what they plan to do means amnesty, Means these people will be voting, and means they'll be voting for a free lunch just like every other dang Democrat I ever met does. 912, Bill Colley with you on Top Story 77. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX as well as newsradio1310.com.
Yes, one of the things we need to understand is that these, and like I say, some of them are very nice people, very good people, very proactive people, hardworking. These Hispanics, but they, in the first Obama election, in my precinct, there was only a couple that had voted. It was just minimal. In the second one, there were upwards of 80, anywhere from 5 upwards to 80. This is the kind of proactivity that was done, at least ways here in the Magic Valley in my precinct. Now, those people were taking care of business, and they got their man reelected. So this kind of thing, they're not just laying around. They may not work hard in some cases, but when it comes to voting and retaining their men, their people, they're out there doing their job.
And yeah, it's almost we've failed, I think, to notice. Thanks for the call. We've failed to notice over the years that they have built this system. I remember when I was living in a small state like Delaware, you have fewer than 1 million people. You have just 3 counties. So, but it's a very large population in one part of the state. It's actually one of the most congested places on the East Coast in the northern half of the state. I was living in the more traditional southern part of the state where you have a lot more conservative Republicans and they dominate politics. But unfortunately, they don't have the numbers statewide. And I remember the local Republican chairman telling me that up in the urban area to the north, that on election day, most of your big labor unions, they had the day off. And all of your government workers who are unionized had the day off. And then a lot of these other people who are involved in the Democrat Party on the periphery, and that is a lot of the special interest groups, and that includes many people who've immigrated here, they would end up having a day off as well if they were working at all. And what would happen was the Democrat Party had them all tracked. They would go into a neighborhood with a bus. And this happens block after block after block. So you're talking, 50, 60, 70 buses. And they just pick all these people up who have to go to a particular polling area. They take them on the bus down to the polls. They all get off the bus at once. They all go in. They vote as instructed for their fellow travelers. Then they come back out, and as they get on the bus, they get a $20 bill and a box lunch. So they can eat their lunch. They get dropped off again back in their neighborhood. And then you know what they do? They take that $20 and they go down to the neighborhood watering hole, and they get knee walking drunk. Sometimes I think they do that before they go vote. But I'm just sharing with you, that's how it works. And the Democrat Party has built this machine all over the country. The Republican Party still has no response to that. None. We talk a good game, and we think that people are going to hear us and go, oh, bankruptcy, that's bad. That might happen in a few years. Yeah. So say what? I'll go out and vote for the conservative candidate. Or are they going to hear somebody say, hey, that guy over there is mean. The boss is making more money than you do, and he's not very nice. And really, you should have what he has. And tell you what, if you vote for me, I'll make sure that you get lots of sweets every day when you come to work. Who are you going to vote for, right? So a lot of people are out there. And if you heard the last segment of the program, the last half hour, those morons who don't even know who this country won independence from or when that happened, again, who are they going to be voting for? I think that question is pretty well answered. Donald Trump, by the way, was talking with Bill O'Reilly about some of these controversies. Take a listen.
Do you believe there's an anti-conservative bias at NBC? You've worked for him a long time.
Absolutely. You have Sleepy Eyes Chuck Todd, who does Meet the Press, which is failing in the ratings. You have all sorts of bias. MSNBC, nobody watches it, but it's a total disaster in terms of bias. I mean, you absolutely have a tremendous bias. So much so that I told my daughter came up to me, Ivanka. She said, Dad, what do you think? I said, well, I'd love you to be a conservative Republican, but in terms of your life, it's a lot easier to be a Democrat who happens to be liberal, because I will tell you, you can go through life a lot easier. We have to fight like hell, but we're going to make the country great again. And if I get elected, I'll make this country great again, Bill. And we're right on the border.
And he says, we're right on the border. And, of course, he's referring to NBC firing him and Universal, which is part of that empire, or Univision, is not going to be carrying his USA pageant. So you understand, but he doesn't care. You see, they can't. As he pointed out in his speech, he said, "I'm worth $8.7 billion. I'm very rich." He doesn't have to be worried about what they're saying or what they think. And while I'm not necessarily a Trump fan, I'm telling you what, he's immune to a lot of this. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. It's 917.
Good morning, Bill. Hey, I'm getting a little bit discouraged with our party because what we're trying to do is be nice guys and fight this thing from the middle. And you can't fight an extreme from the middle. You fight an extreme by fighting from the opposite extreme. We've got to be just as wild and just as mean and just as dirty as the people on the other side in order to be able to rise somewhere in the center. And we've got to take this attitude, no more Mr. Nice Guy. And when they start calling us names like the Bible-packing, gun-packing moron, we've got to come back and say, no. We're dealing with a bunch of perverted freaks that are out there, and call them that, because that's what they are, society's freaks. And as far as our people that are coming across the border, some of these people, I know 4, for example, that are polygamists. They have a wife here and a wife in Mexico. One of them, as a matter of fact, has 2 children by one wife and 3 children by the other one, and he switches back and forth, brings one up here and then takes the other one home, and all 5 children are here going to school. And this situation is completely out of hand. One of them has a wife that lives over in a government-subsidized housing unit, and the other wife lives with him. And this is a situation where I'm going to say, is this what we're looking at next? Are we going to legalize polygamy?
Yes, that's the next one they're working on. There's a court case in Texas as we speak. In fact, being fought by some Muslim immigrants who said they would never, ever, ever come to our country and try to impose their will and their culture upon us. We've been hearing that too right here in the Magic Valley, haven't we?
Well,
but they're doing
Muslims. The Mexicans are coming to this country, and they're polygamists, and they're going to be asking for the same thing, and they're getting a pretty powerful vote program.
Yeah, and when they get amnesty, they'll all be lining up and voting. Thank you for the call. The Texas situation. No, we've just come here because we want the fruits of the land of liberty. No, we'll never ask you to acknowledge our culture, and we'll never say we're offended by seeing a cross on a church. We'll never ask that we can beat our wives because it's part of our religious faith. No, none of that will ever happen. God bless America, land that I... Wait a minute. I got another wife over here. Hey, I just noticed I've got a lot more of my buddies who've moved into the neighborhood. And now we've elected a couple of aldermen, too. And you know what? We want polygamy. And we want our women to wear tents. And by the way, we want a call to prayer being shouted from every corner during the course of the day, 5 times. You see where we're headed? And yet Libby out there says, don't worry about it. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. Just shut up, you knuckle-dragging conservatives. We've got more coming up. Hey, speaking of guns, how to use them and how to drop a criminal dead. I just have a quick story I want to reference. When I was working as a television news director, late 1990s, early part of this century, it's funny you have to say that, early part of this century, which already was a long time ago. Yes, and we all say, where did the time go? But I was working and I went to a convention. In fact, I was referencing going to San Antonio a couple of times in my life. Once I went to a retreat there, and another time I went there to a television convention. And while I happened to be there, it was Radio and Television News Directors Association would put these things on every year. And while I was there trying to stay out of the heat, San Antonio in early September is a warm, warm place. And we were all walking around in dark suits. I'll tell you what, the walk from the hotel across the street to the convention center, that was always a thrill. Even just going a block and through the door. By that time, of course, you wished that you'd be in your Hawaiian shirt and your shorts. And then we had a really beautiful evening one night where at the sunset, and all of a sudden it cooled off to where it was comfortable. And one of the networks threw a garden party, and a group of us got invited, and I went to the garden party, and I met Lynn Russell. Lynn Russell was at the time an anchor for the Clinton News Network, CNN. She never really quite fit in there, though, because she's not a Clintonite. Not at all. Lynn Russell was a sheriff's deputy. She used to actually go out sometimes on her time off from CNN when it was based in Atlanta, and she would do traffic direction. And her husband, who also worked as a reporter at CNN, he was a Green Beret before he ended up going into network news. And the two of them are also very, very skilled when it comes to firearms. They were traveling across country, and they were on their way through New Mexico. And Albuquerque, I'm told, is a nice place, a city of about 700,000 now. And they stopped at a Motel 6. And he jumped in the shower, and she decided she needed something from the trunk of the car. And she went outside. Now, she didn't lock the door behind her. It wasn't a long walk. Came back to the room, opened the door, and there was a man there, and he had a gun. And he was there to rob her or worse. And just about that time, her husband came out of the shower. Apparently, he had been drying off in the bathroom, and the thief didn't hear her husband. And the thief was startled, and so then they tried to negotiate with him. They started offering to give him, jewelry and other things that they had to try to calm him down. And with that, he decided he was going to abscond with her husband's briefcase. But as he was taking it, he turned around and started shooting. Her husband, as I mentioned, who served as a Green Beret, was hit 3 times. But while he was taking bullets, he retrieved his own pistol, and he returned just 1 shot. That was all it took. Thief crumbled, managed to crawl into the parking lot, and by the time he got to the parking lot, Satan called him home. And when police arrived, that's where they happened to find this criminal. He was, by that time, he'd assumed parking lot temperature. And Lynn Russell and her husband is doing well. He's going to recover. No gunshot wound is non-life-threatening. They're all bad. These are always serious wounds. But he managed to hold up pretty well through it. He has gone through surgery, is expected to make a full recovery. They're not young. I mean, she looked great on the air, but she was probably about 60 when I met her. So they'd be well now into their mid to late 70s. But here you go. Good people, knowing how to use firearms. And what did they do? They got the drop on the bad guy. And he will never, ever rob anyone again. Where he is right now, he is ruining the fact that he was ever born or that he ever took up a life of crime. Because he wakes up every day, if he gets to sleep at all, in hell, and he's surrounded by fiery flames. That's what criminals have in store for them. And he just got dispatched there a little bit earlier because he messed with the wrong people. 928, Bill Colley with you. 79 at our studios. Want to thank you for joining us on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I got to mention, we're going to do a little follow-up with the folks from Better Health next week, from Trip Family Medicine. They'll be coming up and joining us in studio coming up Wednesday, next week between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, as they do every week. Russell Singleton, who's a physician assistant at the office, Russell is going to be joining us, and he's going to start fleshing out some things that he's actually talked about a little bit in the past, giving us some details on those. But we always like to give you an opportunity, if you have the chance, to give them a telephone call, and maybe if you have a medical question or two, they can answer that. We're going to recap the diet and exercise discussion we had yesterday, but how lifestyle changes can also help you out, and weightlifting and some other things that you might do too to sort of firm yourself up. Weight loss drugs, some of those are fad drugs and the like. Prescription drugs, we're going to talk about those. And the negative effect that certain people like Dr. Oz have on people who are desperate to lose weight and sometimes turn to a charlatan. So all those details coming up next week right here on Top Story on Wednesday morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. And remember, you can find the doctor's office. That's Trip Family Medicine on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. And also remember, life's too short to not feel good. We've got more coming up. One more half hour of the program left before my holiday weekend starts. Woohoo! My old bosses used to say, don't cheer that. It gives the people the impression that you don't like your work. Do you get that impression listening? Seriously, come on now. As I said, one more half hour left, and then I'm running for the door. So I was looking through the Fox news rundown this morning. Here's something that's not a surprise. Name to me, just give me a handful of names of liberal Christian denominations in the United States, and I bet most of you are going to start off, if I said list them, who's the most uber liberal when it comes to religious faith? In other words, having discarded the Bible to worship instead the Democrat Party and political correctness and, modern American redistribution. And most likely you would say that's the Episcopal Church, which is the American version of the Anglican Church, which we've called it for a long time because I know that a lot of those people we heard in that audio a little bit earlier this morning, they didn't know who we actually fought a war against for independence, but the reason it's called Episcopal and not Anglican in this country, some of them still call themselves Anglican. In fact, more of the conservative branches have gone back to that usage to try to differentiate themselves. Remember when they elected a homosexual as a bishop? The guy had left his wife and was living with another man. And a lot of people said, oh, this is a bold, courageous step into the future. Well, let me ask you a question. If your bishop was straight and your bishop in the church left his wife to go shag another woman, wouldn't that be considered somehow to be unbiblical? And you really wouldn't want that guy in charge. Let's take the gender out of it for a moment. But they still elected this guy bishop, right? I mean, they put and he stayed on the job for about 10 years in New Hampshire, and then realized that he was such a drag on the church and that he was destroying it that he finally resigned, and went off and lived happily ever after with his husband. In fact, the former governor of New Jersey, McGreevey, who had some issues like that, divorced his wife. He's now working as a married Episcopal priest, but he's not married to a woman. They flock to this denomination, which doesn't have anywhere near the membership it used to because all of the traditionalists got PO'd and they're gone now. So they're desperately trying to work with 2% of the population to build those coffers back up. In other words, to get some money on the collection plate. And that's going to continue, according to Fox News.
Days after the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage nationwide, Episcopalian leaders voted to allow religious weddings for same-sex couples. The House of Deputies overwhelmingly approved the measure Wednesday, and the House of Bishops passed the resolution a day earlier. The new rule takes effect on November 29th, the first Sunday of Advent, which marks the beginning of the Christian year, but clergy can decline to perform ceremonies if they choose. The Episcopal Church made history in 2003 by electing the first openly gay bishop. Steve Rappaport, Fox News Radio.
Do you remember when you were young and those readings of Leviticus where they used to tell you that if a woman and a woman were having relations or a man and a man were having relations, God told Moses, yes, God told Moses, he said, you're to take them outside the encampment and you're to stone them to death. Or if a man causes a woman, anybody causes a woman who's got a baby in the oven to lose that baby, to abort that child, again, you're to get rid of them in the same manner. Of course, we say today, well, we don't do that barbaric stuff any longer. Well, tell it to God. I mean, he suggested this was a proper punishment. And I guess because he figured if people saw it, they'd go, maybe I don't want that same thing. And then people say, well, Jesus came along and there's a new covenant now. But Jesus never said, hey, you got to reject all of that. In fact, he was a conservative and a traditionalist. And people say, well, yes, but he was nice and forgiving. And he went around patting everybody on the head and telling them that whatever they did was okay. Really? Yes, and he wasn't violent at all. How about, though, when he fashioned a whip from his cord and started whipping those moneylenders? Well, he had to because they were bankers. Okay, we got your thinking now on all of that. Some days you look at this and you wonder how the liberals come to the conclusions they come to. Don't let the facts of religious faith, though, get in their way because that would only upset their apple cart in a manner. Here's Bobby Jindal talking to Bill O'Reilly. Bobby Jindal, governor of Louisiana, who may not cooperate with all of these changes when it comes to marriage in his home state.
Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal issued an executive order saying that Louisiana court clerks and other employees do not have to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples because of religious objections if they have them. In addition, the order prohibits the state from denying or revoking tax exemptions to religious organizations who dissent on gay marriage. Individuals are protected as well. If you don't want to provide services for gay nuptials in Louisiana, you're protected. But now the ACLU and 6 other organizations are suing Governor Jindal and the state for discrimination. The governor joins us now from Lincoln, Nebraska. You must have anticipated that this was going to happen. What do you think the long game is for the ACLU? What are they trying to do in your state?
Well, Bill, thank you for having me. You're right. We did anticipate this. So we did our own Religious Freedom Restoration Act in 2010. We did the executive order May 19th in anticipation of this this awful ruling. Bill, I think their long game is the ACLU used to be for religious freedom before they are against it. You mentioned in the earlier segment, I think they want to get to a point where we no longer have First Amendment religious freedom rights. So, for example, you heard during the court case, the Solicitor General was asked if they ruled the way they did, would this impact, for example, the tax-exempt status for higher ed institutions within a religious affiliation? He said it might.
There you go. Bobby Jindal, governor of Louisiana, candidate for president of the United States, speaking to Bill O'Reilly. What you may be seeing is states simply saying they're going to nullify the Supreme Court decisions or the laws of the federal government. And it may become a growing movement in this country. We've already had in several states around the country discussion of secession, sometimes individual corners of certain states. Maryland, Colorado, various places saying they'd like to go their own way. And it appears we may be in the early stages of that. It's like 1859 all over again. Reading a blog today by Dwight Longnecker, who was one time an Anglican priest. And he said, you got to remember, it's a church that was founded by, number one, the guy who couldn't keep it in his trousers when it came to women other than his wife. That would be Henry VIII of England. And he said it's also a state church, or was founded as a state church, which means it doesn't challenge the latest establishment view. And the latest establishment view is that people are going to be able to marry whomever and often as they want. 944, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Our telephone number 736-0300. Also my email address, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. Last name spelled Colley. We have a caller with us. You're next. You're on the air.
Yeah, Bill?
Yes, sir.
First off, I want to tell you I like your show, but hey, I wanted to mention something this morning. I've been going to McDonald's in Buell every morning, me and my brother, for ever since they opened. This morning, and they have Fox News on. This morning I go in there, and they will not allow Fox News to be on their television anymore. And so I just want to put that out for the public to think about. You wonder why all these kids and all these young people don't know anything about this country. It's because they're keeping it from everybody. Even the news now, they won't allow to be in the McDonald's stores. And anyhow, I just wanted to put that out there for people to think about. Anyhow, I'm not going back to McDonald's because of that. And anyhow, you have a good 4th of July.
You too, sir. Thank you much for the call. I will say this. I was not all that long ago in the McDonald's at Addison and Washington, the Chevron McDonald's, and Fox News was on the TV screen there. But possibly somebody complained. That's what it comes down to, doesn't it? And how come we can't have Morning Joe on there with that wonderful Mika shilling for the liberals and the fellow travelers? And I'm sure that's how it goes in these situations. 9:45. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley. 80 right now at News Radio 1310 KLIX. Hello?
Yeah, hi. I heard a while back that President Obama ordered all the crosses removed from all military chapels on military bases. Is that correct?
I don't think so. I don't think he could get away with making such a distinction. I'm sure he wouldn't mind trying, but I think that's one of those things that would probably be. He got started somewhere as an internet rumor and has just mushroomed because it's one of those things you'd likely think that he would do.
Okay, I wondered maybe you could verify that one way or the other.
Yeah, I'll see if I can look into that. Thank you much for the telephone call. 946, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. As we mentioned to you yesterday, we were sharing the story that there are people now who say that chaplains who will not condone same-sex marriage should be removed from the military. You have a lot of people who currently serve, though, who still have very traditional views on all of these things. How come they don't get any respect? And my guess is, and there are people who are homosexuals, have been serving in militaries since the very first armies or bands of tribal bands were formed to defend a village or to go take the next village. That's not unusual. I mean, there were people fighting in our Revolutionary War of that persuasion in the War of 1812, in the Mexican War, in the Civil War, in the Spanish-American World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, First Gulf War, the last two wars. But it never was out in the open. And never, it was one of those things. That's what people did. But the majority of those troops are straight. How come no one respects their views any longer? And then they're told if they have those views, that those views are wrong. Well, what if you were raised, let's say, in a good Southern Baptist home? Who's to tell you in government that your views are wrong? You're up next. It's 9:48. You're on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and Top Story.
Hey, Bill. I don't understand how it's discrimination for if these churches choose not to marry gay couples. For instance, the Catholic Church won't marry just a straight couple if they're not Catholic. And
Right.
That's never been an issue. I know in the LDS Church, if you're not, they don't even allow all LDS couples to get married in their temple, even though they're straight. There's certain criteria. So how does this become a discrimination issue for just the gays when there's always been standards and rules for churches?
Sure. My dad was married before he met my mother, and they had to, she wanted a church wedding, so they couldn't just do a civil ceremony. They had to go. There were 7 churches in my hometown. They went to the first 6 before number 7 finally said okay.
Yeah, there's a vetting process, right?
Right. And they had to go through that. And finally, I think it was the Methodist church where they were married, even though they weren't Methodists. But they got the wish of the church wedding done. But it wasn't easy. This was, of course, we're going back 50 some odd years ago. People had different standards then, and you were expected to uphold those standards.
Absolutely.
Thank you much. Take care. Have a great weekend. 9:49, and in just a few seconds, we'll be joined by Mike Gallagher with his update. And that, of course, is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. And their telephone number is 736-6563. That's 736-6563. Hey, I was talking to Penny Main the other day, and she says the biggest and the best of all the 4th of July celebrations is taking place in Burley along the river this weekend. Following Mike Gallagher, maybe you can tell me if she's right or if you would dispute that. She's not wrong about much, but some of you may I think perhaps because she lives there, she might have a bit of a bias. And a thank you to Mike Gallagher. Tomorrow morning, during the course of our morning from 7 until 10 o'clock, we're going to have an Independence Day special from Glenn Beck's The Blaze. So I hope you can tune into that. I'm looking forward to that myself. I may sleep a little later tomorrow because I'll be attending the concert tonight, the Patriots Night event, which is I think just going to be the event of the year here. Hey, a quick note, and I didn't think of this. I should have, and I'm surprised someone didn't call me who was listening and say, well, tell you what, I want to argue with you when I mentioned Leviticus and punishments prescribed by God. You may recall, though, in your New Testament, of course, the woman who was going to be stoned for adultery, to which there was a line from God incarnate, walking around as a human being here on earth, and he says, those among you who have not sinned, you can cast the first stone. And of course, they all kind of stand there, scuffle their feet a bit, and they wander off. That's true. But people often, liberals will cite that and say, well, there you go. You got that plank in your own eye. You shouldn't be telling me how to live, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what God incarnate then says to the woman often gets forgotten in their arguments. And what he says is, woman, where are your accusers? They look around, the square is empty. And he says, now go and sin no more. So there you have it. And in that part of it, the left tends to drop out of the conversation when they try to have that argument with you. 9:55, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I was sharing with you a little bit earlier some of the music of Madison Rising who'll be playing tonight. I just want to give you a little bit of this. This is their version of God Bless America. And it's it just stirs my soul when I hear this.
While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let our stars swear allegiance to a land that's still free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair. As we raise up our voices to the air with this solemn prayer. God bless America. God, please save America today.
Madison Rising again playing tonight at the Performing Arts Center at the College of Southern Idaho. They are the main event this evening. Patriots night, of course, takes place on a yearly basis now in Idaho. And this is a fundraiser for the Sergeant Chris Workman Scholarship. And I do hope if you're not going to make it there, you'll consider perhaps attending next year as well.
This land that I love, stand beside her and guide her through the night.
And I just want to remind everybody, have a great and safe Independence Day weekend. God willing, the creek don't rise. I'll see you back here on the other side Monday morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Rush Limbaugh coming up following news at 10 o'clock from Fox. Sean Hannity following news at 1 o'clock from Fox. Glenn Beck following the news at 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Save America.